Hi there, I'm Lauren and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Sweet Smiling Soul, where I talk about all things sewing. Today we are working on part 2 of the Doll and Dollhouse Storybook. Last week we completed the doll, and this week we're going to be working on the outside of the dollhouse. So we've got the front here and we've got the back. If you haven't got the pattern yet, you can purchase the pattern inside my shop, which is linked in the description below. That is what this tutorial is based on, my DIY doll and dollhouse storybook. So check out the pattern and follow along and let me know what you think. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, you can check that out in the doll and dollhouse storybook playlist that I've got here on YouTube, and I'll also link it up here somewhere so you can follow that. Then you can move on to this section and start creating your own dollhouse. All the materials that you need for this part of the dollhouse are inside the instructions, but I will list a few materials in this tutorial and I'll show you what I'm using for my version of the dollhouse. But it is customizable. You can make it simple by using felt fabrics. You could even use glue to attach some of the pieces to the dollhouse. You don't always have to sew if you just want to speed up the process a little bit more. Today I'm going to do a mixture of hand sewing and sewing with my machine, so you'll get to see how I go about it. I'm also going to be using a mixture of scrap fabrics and felt. Felt just comes in handy for those small little pieces like the leaves on the door and on the back as well. I also find it easy to use felt for the window frame. I'll show you how to do all that in this tutorial. For this project you will need page 1 and 2 of the Dollhouse Storybook pattern. If you haven't got this, you can purchase it from my shop. So I'm working with the outside pieces today, so we'll just need to cut out the foundation piece, the door, the window and the window backing. So I've got that. I'll also need some interfacing to give the fabric some structure. I've decided to use this linen for the outside of the house. I'm likely going to use these fabrics for the door and the window backing. And for the window frame, I'm thinking to use this felt. It just makes it a little bit easier. Felt doesn't fray, so if you don't want to have that frayed, scrappy look that you would get if you were using fabric, then you could use felt. But you can also fold in the seams if you decide to use fabric. So for this dollhouse, I used fabric and I folded in the seams. If you are using felt, you'll just need to trim down about 1/2 centimeter because you won't need the seams. So that information is all in the pattern. So hopefully you've got that there and you can just have it as a reminder whenever you're using felt. So those are the pieces that I'm going to be working with. For the little plants on the outside, I've also decided to use felt. I've got some dark green and light green here. You also might like to use some embroidery thread for the plants. For this project, I did a running stitch along the edge of the plants, but I also used heat and bond to attach the pieces. So you could use your sewing machine after you use the heat and bond here. So this just helps fabric attach to fabric, and I just use an iron to press it on here, and then it just stabilizes the fabric. It is a good idea to sew over it just because it might not be that secure. So for this one I did a hand stitch, a running stitch around here with some embroidery thread, but I've also made one where I've just put it under my machine and sewn a straight stitch around the edge as well. You've got a few different options to attach the plant to the front and also the plant to the back as well. I did the same thing here. You'll need regular sewing supplies. I'm going to be using this erasable pen to trace my pattern onto the fabric. I've also got a seam ripper just in case I make any mistakes. I've got a rotary cutter, a cutting mat and a ruler in the back there. I've also got some tweezers which might come in handy for later in the project just to turn things right side out. I also have some fabric scissors. You don't have to sew everything, you can also use fabric glue. So I've got some fabric glue here as an option, but today I will sew most of the project. You could also use a hot glue gun if you don't have any fabric glue. This might come in handy for when you attach the little plant to the front. You could even use a hot glue gun or glue to attach the button to the door. You've got options. Pins and needles will come in handy. You will need a button for this one for the door. And I think that's it. So if there's anything else that we need for this project, I'll let you know in the description, but you should have everything listed in the instructions as well. An iron and an ironing board will also help to make everything nice and neat and fold in the seams as well if you're using fabric. So the first step is to cut out the pattern pieces. So I've got my pattern all cut out and ready to go. I've got the foundation piece, the door, the window background, and the window frame. So now I'm going to cut out my fabric and felt if you're using felt. Let's do it. So now I'm cutting out the window frame, and these pieces in here need to be cut out. So you can do that with scissors. I usually just pinch it and then cut around the edge, or you could use a craft knife of some sort. So I'm going to do that now. So I've decided to use this white felt as the frame, and then I've got this backing fabric that's going to show through the gaps in the window. So I'm just going to carefully cut out those, and because I'm also using felt around the edge, I'm not going to need this 5mm seam allowance. I've cut the piece to size according to the pattern, but I'm probably going to trim it down a little bit because I don't need it to be that big. It's not a really big difference, so if you wanted a bigger window, you can keep it if you're using felt. But yeah, I might trim it down just a little bit. So now I've traced the pattern on my felt, and I'm going to cut out these squares here with some scissors. For the plant at the front and the back, I just kind of draw leaf shapes and then cut them out to the size that I want. I didn't actually include the leaves in the pattern because I felt like you could just really get creative with it and just draw, or like rounded shapes or straight shapes, pointed shapes, like whatever kind of plant you want. So yeah, I will do that now with some felt, and then I'll have all my pieces ready to go. I kind of just hand draw a leaf shape like this, do two curved lines that join together, and I just do them different sizes so that I can kind of blend them together and create the shape of a plant. I might go long there, have one longer leaf amongst it, might do 4. Might as well use this felt. So these are small leaves, you can create them as big as you like, but I think when you're using felt, it's just so much easier. I do love like the look of a scrap fabric dollhouse. Like most of what I'm going to use for this will be scrap fabric, but for the smaller pieces like this, it just can help to use felt. So yeah, you just cut them out, kind of just trim them down until you're happy with the shape. And I'm going to use heat and bond for these just because it makes it easier to attach them to the house, and then I'll likely just sew over them. I have hand sewn the felt pieces on before, or just kind of created a running stitch on other dollhouses, but I think today I might use my sewing machine just because it's a little bit faster. So we have 4 leaves that I think might look nice like this. I think I'm going to use those for the front, and then I might do some dark green ones for the back. So I'll do the same now while I'm at it. I'll put the front leaves aside. This time I'm going to create bigger leaves. So what I did for this was create 5 leaves. I had 3 large ones at the bottom and then 2 smaller ones in between. But yeah, like I said, you can get creative with it, make whatever shape you like. I think I might leave it at that. I'll just put that on the back of my dollhouse. I've cut out all my pieces. I have my plant for the back, I have my plant for the front, and I have my front door, the window frame made out of felt, and I've got some fabric for the back, and then I've got my foundational piece, which is going to be the front of the house, and I've also cut out a piece of interfacing for the front of the house as well. For each foundation piece we're going to have some interfacing just to give it a little bit of structure. So the next step is to iron this interfacing on. The interfacing also kind of helps to make it a little bit stiff and easier to sew on, so you can use whatever interfacing you like. This one is quite fine, it's not too stiff, so just kind of use what you have, and yeah, any kind of interfacing should do. If you did want a softer dollhouse, you could even use wadding for the inside as well. So I'm going to iron this on now, and then I'll work on attaching the door and the window to the front of the house. So I've ironed on the interfacing. My interfacing isn't as sticky as I thought it would be, so it's a little bit loose, but it's okay. It's all going to be sewn together with the other rooms at the end. So now that I've done that, I'm going to fold it in half, and that way I know what is the front and what is the back. I've got the front here. So I folded my fabric in half. I also went ahead and added heat and bond to the back of the leaves, so when I peel this off, it has like a sticky adhesive thing, and I can iron it directly onto the fabric. That'll just help it stay in place before I sew it on. So I've gone ahead and done that. You don't have to do that if you don't have any, that's fine. You might just need to pin it in place so that you can sew around the edge. So I'm going to put those aside for now, and the window as well. And I'm going to start with the door. You can trim down the seam allowance if you're using felt, or you could even trim it down and keep the raw edges of the fabric. It's totally up to you. I'm going to fold in my seam 5mm, and then I'm going to attach it to the corner here. So I've pressed down the side seams on the straight edges, and for the curved edge I'm just going to clip into the seam a little bit just to help me turn this curved edge over so that I can press it down. So now I'm going to attach it to the bottom right hand corner here, and I'm just going to make sure all the seams are tucked in. So I want it to be kind of up and away from the edge. I would say a safe bet is about 3 centimeters in roughly from the bottom and from the side. And then once you're happy with the position, just pin it down. I've pinned that in place, and now I'm going to top stitch close to the edge. So I've sewn on the door, and now I'm going to sew the window on. So I haven't sewn the bottom on. I'm just going to place this on top and then secure it by just sewing around the edges here. I'll just get the position right, and then I'll take it to my machine. So I've sewn around the edge, and now I'm going to sew around the edge of the squares. So I've sewn on the door and the window. Now I'm going to attach the plant. I'm just going to place the leaves in the shape of a plant until I'm happy with the shape. You can really put it wherever you like. I think I just like it kind of next to the door, overlapping a little bit. I just like that look. I'm going to peel off my heat and bond backing. I'm going to take it to my ironing board now and just press these to secure them, and then I'm going to sew around the edges. So I have sewn on the felt. Now I'm just going to trim off the threads, and then I'm going to decide on which button to use for the doorknob, and I'll sew that on. And then the last step will be to attach the leaves that we made for the back. So now I am going to sew on the button for the door handle. I'm going to place it about halfway up, maybe just a little bit higher, and I'm going to start stitching. So my door handle is on, and now I'm just going to knot the back a couple of times just so it stays secure. Now I'm going to move on to attaching the plant at the back. So again, I'll just iron the shapes on where I'm happy with them. And I'm gonna kind of go closer to the edge because I will sew over this. On this one, I put them right on the corner and then I sewed over it at the bottom so they kind of tuck into the seam there. It's up to you where you want your plant. I think I might just place them about 1 centimeter up, or maybe half a centimeter up from the edge of the fabric. And I'm just going to do the same technique that I did for the front. So for this plant here, I'll just do the same using my machine. So to help me find the placement for the leaves, I will just fold this fabric. So for this side of the dollhouse, we will be cutting off about 1 centimeter because when we sew it all together, that's gonna shrink a little bit. So if we kind of place it halfway between the edge and to about 1 centimeter away from this edge, if we make sure it's in the middle of that, then it should be in the middle when everything's finished. So we have now completed the first step of the Dollhouse Storybook, which is making the outside. We've got interfacing on the inside of this one, and then on the outside we've got the door, the window, and a couple of plants, and this is going to fold over to create that book shape. So this is the outside of the book, and next we're going to work on the inside. So stay tuned for part 3 of this doll and dollhouse series. Next section of the dollhouse that we're going to work on is the wardrobe and the bedroom at the back. So these two are actually on the same piece of fabric, so that's why we're going to do those two next, and then we'll move on to the rest of the rooms. So I hope that makes sense. If you haven't got the pattern yet, you can purchase the pattern inside my shop, which is linked in the description below. Let me know what you think of the dollhouse so far, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment on this video, like it, subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to continue to follow along with this doll and dollhouse series. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll talk to you soon.